We are live. There we go. Hey, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Here is Scott. I'm here. It's all about answering your questions. So let's not waste time on, pleasantries and all that stuff. I have questions from the last session that we haven't answered. It's like being in a hospital, right? First, you need to kind of like get over those who are waiting for a long time, and then you get to the new ones. We'll do both. Anyways, let's go with the one from before, from Boaz Galil. I guess that's your compatriot. Am I pronouncing it right?
Boaz Galil, probably.
Okay, there we go. Close enough. Yeah. Any suggestions on methods or tools to manage certificate renewal? Scott usually has a much longer answer. I start with a short one, and then Scott goes crazy.
3, 2, 1. Cert Manager.
Cert Manager, exactly. I mean, no. So there are two parts of the story, right? There is a certificate authority, right? Which can be as free and as easy if you're public as let's encrypt. Forget about it, right? Or it can be something else. If you're in some messed up enterprise company, you might have your own certificate authority that everybody is going crazy about, and so on and so forth, right? But yes, once you know where your certificate authority is, then Cert Manager. That's it. I don't know about you, Scott. I don't even know of any other solution. Kind of like
no. There's the certificate operator was created that kind of wraps around and gives a better UX around Cert Manager. In some people's minds, but no, Cert Manager is the really only way that makes sense. And if you're on-prem, use Vault as the backend that Cert Manager talks to as your CA.
Okay, a live one from Guy. What are the differences between DevOps, SRE, and platform engineer? I'll do a quick one first. DevOps is a cultural shift. How we can work together, and I would define it as the goal being self-sufficient team. How can we have a team that is capable of writing code, testing, deploying to production, making sure that it's still working, and all the stuff, right? SRE, I like the sentence that was quoted many times by Google, who actually came to it, and they said, and I'm paraphrasing here, SRE is if we give developers the task to solve operational problems, right? Basically, it's writing code, not only code, but writing code to solve problems, not just operating, executing commands. And platform engineer, or platforms, let's say, are a way how to enable DevOps. Not necessarily the only way, but one of the ways. If you want people to be self-sufficient and work together, be able to write code, to test, to deploy, to do this and that, you need to either give them 500 years to learn everything, about everything, or you create some kind of a platform that enables people to do that, right? Yeah. Scott probably has now a much longer one.
Well, no, it's pretty short. DevOps is what everyone claims to do but doesn't do. SRE is what is lacking in most organizations, and therefore ChatGPT, for example, went down today. And platform engineering is the title that everyone wants to put now as their title to add another zero to their salary. That is the general meaning of all of it. All of these things are just random terms.
Your explanation wins. I'll give you that one. You win.
No, in all seriousness, though, DevOps is a culture. SRE is really about production, right? DevOps, I think, is more of a culture about how to help bridge that gap between Dev and Ops. SRE is an element of that, but can be much more specialized, especially in larger companies where SREs deal with really production reliability elements, so much closer to the ops side than the dev side traditionally, I believe. And platform engineers are the enablers, right? They're the person that hopefully you put in the dark black room in the back that no one ever sees, that does the amazing stuff, the real, that build the tools that everyone else can use.
Yeah. Okay, one from before. This is a question, and I put here the answer to that question one of you gave, because I strongly disagree with it. We'll see whether Scott also disagrees. So the question is, how do I manage database in Kubernetes? What is the best way to answer that? Because before that, he was explaining how he has, next day, he will be asked about that, some exam, something, doesn't matter. So, and the answer is, go with stateful set deploying DB on Kubernetes environment. And in my head, that's the worst option you can do. That's the option if you have no other option. Right? Because there is more to.
It's the option if it's a question. If it's the option if it's an answer to a CKA or CKAD question in which they're just talking about core Kubernetes. That's the only time that is the answer.
Exactly. Because in my head, it's simple. There is more to databases than being able to run them as pods in a cluster. Kind of there is synchronization between replicas. There are backups. There's a bunch of things, and you need to have a mechanism to do those things without without kubectl exec into the container, and then doing stuff.
And even worse than that, we're seeing more and more. Initially, most database operators were built around stateful sets, right? And gave wrappers around that. But more and more of them today actually aren't using stateful sets under the hood. And they're just re-implementing the logic of stateful set for one key reason. The main issue you will have with a stateful set is I wish you luck when your database runs out of space and you need to increase the size of the persistent volumes. It's not fun, and you have to delete the stateful set, but keep the pods, change things manually, then try and re-import the pods into the... It's terrible. Stateful sets currently don't support resizing of PVCs. It's a challenge. There's been a PR up for that for many, 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 many years. And because of that, stateful sets are the worst way to manage it. Only use operators.
And even if stateful sets would be doing that, still, it's really, if you're creating an operator, there is nothing wrong in that operator managing pods for you instead of kind of going to higher level, because then they control what's happening when it's happening.
Right.
Whatever.
Although I would, understand completely an operator when stateful sets get that capability. I would completely understand operators using a stateful set as their building block to simplify the amount of code and management that they have and the amount of watches that they need to do and things like that. It lowers the amount of logic by letting stateful set deal with it. But, currently, I think stateful set is a terrible implementation of a backend for a DB operator because of these issues.
Okay, a live one. Can you make MLOps playlist? I'm not that deep into MLOps, so I can't. Maybe Scott is. I doubt. Are you Scott into MLOps?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
I'm not even sure what is MLOps. I know pretty well what is ML, even though I'm not an expert. I don't even know what is MLOps.
Yeah, no, it's I'm just not in that area, and don't have enough to share in that area, fortunately.
Okay, so bunch of hellos from Martin, from Nikos, from Lucas. Hey guys, boys and girls, all that stuff. There is a comment. DevOps blame platform engineer that the SRE need to work at night. And don't worry, SREs are blaming DevOps engineers as well. Everybody blames everybody. No worries.
Exactly.
Don't think that blame is isolated to one group. Okay. From Corey, I heard the term DevSecOps. What's the difference between DevOps and DevSecOps? I feel it's marketing only. I don't think it makes sense. I mean, security makes sense. But kind of, okay, the DevOps is a broad term. Everybody can come in. Kind of like everybody's welcome. That's how I see it.
I think that DevSecOps is a necessity to use that term. Because unfortunately, as an industry, we keep putting security as an afterthought in many of the positions, except for the security teams. Right? Security is not always at the forefront. And I think that when we build DevOps solutions, when we work in a DevOps culture and we build tools and integrations to follow that type of methodology that meet with it, we often don't think about the security side. So I think that it's more of a mental model, DevSecOps, than anything really different. It's a mental model we have to be in, where security is at the center of anything that we do. So really, it's not necessary, because DevOps should be doing that. But considering that devs don't do it and ops don't do it, so we needed to put it in the middle somewhere, because neither side is doing it today.
And I agree. I understand that. I still don't like it, because I could, without now comparing degrees to which that is true, I could say the same thing for test. Okay, so let's call it dev, test, SecOps. I could say the same thing for 57 other things. Kind of, it's not only sec. It's important. Very often it's left for the last thing. I agree. But I don't want to have an acronym that is 500 characters.
Yeah. No, I get it. It's, again, I think it's just a matter of trying to put it front and center. I agree with you that I think that it should have stayed DevOps, but I also wish the industry took security more seriously. So anything that makes people think about security more is a good thing in my mind.
That's true. From before, do you feel there's any tooling that's just fully missing from the current DevOps landscape? Full, and I repeat the word fully, meaning completely non-existent. I can name bad ones that we can improve. I don't know what's missing. I mean, if we know what's missing, somebody would be building it.
I know what in my mind is missing.
Okay.
There is one thing that is missing, which is a sane mechanism or tooling to be able to actually promote configuration between environments while keeping configuration values that are unique per environment. So if we take the GitOps example in the optimal world, you would work with branches. However, branches is the worst thing possible, because you end up just overriding everything that you had set previously. So it doesn't make sense. What you need is something that allows you to almost promote the schema of your config while keeping the values not overridable, right? Like you want some mechanism like that, and Git doesn't support that, because Git is built for code, which should be fully promoted as it is. Git just isn't the right solution for it. It's just the solution that exists everywhere, and therefore it was used for GitOps. I think declarative source control management of configuration is the number one thing that would make everyone's lives, SRE's lives, DevOps engineers' lives, basically CI/CD and Kubernetes guys. It would make all of their lives so much easier, and would make everything easier. It would make many of the tools that are being built now, Cargo would lose half of its appeal if we moved into things like that, because you could just do typical Git flows. I think that's one of the major challenges in today's DevOps world.
Yeah, true. I mean, there's something that has been back of my mind for a while now, and without having a solution. But I feel that actually etcd can be just as good for what we use GitOps today as Git itself. And I'm referring now only to configs. I'm even surprised that nobody's, because really the desired state is Kubernetes. It's not the actual state. The actual state is bunch of other things, but I don't have a bandwidth to start a project, so cannot complain much.
Exactly.
Okay, from Nemanja, is Docker Swarm dead? Yes. Are there use cases where we should use it instead of K8s? No. I mean, let's put it this way. When a company who started a project, whichever project that is fully off that project, not using it at all, that should be the clear message that this is not a thing.
Yeah.
Okay, that was the shortest answer. Brilliant. Okay, this is actually follow up on, are there any tooling missing? For example, at my last company, I wound up just creating a Backstage plugin to show our actual development-related environments where they are, links to logs, Argo CD, etc. I don't count that as missing. That's what Backstage is designed to do. So it's there.
Exactly.
You will just never get a project that does 100% what you need. Some projects will get you 90% there. Some projects will get you 10% there. But that's not missing. That's there.
Exactly. I think that like that's the main thing of Backstage, right? Backstage is a framework and not a product. Backstage is there to the CNCF landscape, or the wider cloud native landscape, even outside of the CNCF, has the tools for nearly everything. It's up to the SREs, platform teams, all of that, to come and bring that together directly for your company, because there are too many options. There can't be one solution that integrates everything together because there are too many permutations. That's where Backstage as a framework makes sense. It allows me to bring all these things, or any IDP in that sense. And I mean the IDP, internal developer portal, that you connect to with your IDP, your identity provider, in order to visualize your IDP, which is the internal developer platform, because we don't know how to name things. But right, like you built a platform, which is all these components, you're just visualizing it at that point. So that's not missing. The tools exist. It's just a matter of building the plugins.
Okay, let's see. What else do we have here? Multi-tenant public clusters. How do we upgrade essentials like cert manager, external DNS, and so on and so forth? I'm not sure I get it, to be honest. Can you guess what?
The one thing that I can think around this area that maybe like a question here, although, feel free to, write in the chat any further explanations. I think that, one of the challenges with multi-tenancy is how do you coordinate things? How do you coordinate when I'm going to do an upgrade in a multi-tenant environment that could affect so many different tenants within my environment? And the answer is carefully. You have to upgrade it when there are breaking changes. You have to make sure that all of your tenants are aware enough time in advance. You have to use tools like, for example, Google is one of the best in this area, like in GKE, where they actually won't let you upgrade a cluster if you're calling APIs of versions that are going to be removed, right? You have to build similar tools. You have to write similar checks for if you are changing the version of Cert Manager and it's removing an API version. You actually need to basically look at the Kubernetes audit logs and see, is anyone calling that API version? Is anyone making requests to it? And if they are, talk to them. But yeah, that's a challenge whether you're a single tenant or multi-tenant.
Next one from Veer. Same guy. More questions. One more. Which tool would you suggest for observability for mobile applications? Based on OpenTelemetry and open source SDKs, etc., etc., etc. I don't have the answer because I don't work with mobile as much. I'm not sure about Scott. What I do know is that it is challenging for many reasons. First of all, you cannot pull metrics because it's on users' phones, right? Second, you very often cannot just push somewhere because Apple especially will not let you, your application, sending data willy-nilly wherever you want. So you probably need to somehow bundle it. And I'm guessing here, you might know more, Scott, you need to bundle it with the request that your application is sending to your servers somehow. But I don't have the answer.
Yeah, I mean, there are tools out there, but just I don't know enough in this area to really give any strong feedback on this. Okay,
I have no idea. What is Fabric Cloud? I never heard of it, so I don't know. Do you know what is Fabric Cloud?
I don't know, and I know that there's Azure has a tool called Fabric. There are 13 tools in the industry called Fabric. I just don't know which Fabric this is, so I've never heard of the tool Fabric Cloud.
I use Fabric AI. It's a small project.
Oh, that's the CLI tool that you use that has like those recipes or whatever in the back
exactly.
end.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, another live. Can you suggest best way to implement Active Directory synchronization with Microsoft Entra ID? I
That's
don't use
the new
Active
name
Directory.
for that's the new name of Microsoft Azure AD is Entra ID, like the Microsoft authentication.
Yeah, why make it easy?
Exactly. Well, actually, Azure AD was even more confusing because has nothing really to do with Active Directory. So like the two are so different from one another that's like calling it the same thing was.
Why make it easy?
Exactly. In the end, there's the appliance that, as far as I remember, there's an appliance you can install on premise, and then you can basically sync between the two. But the best way to implement it is to go to the Microsoft documentation and look at their recommended approach, and then to implement that. Yeah, I'm not an expert on that at all.
Okay, one from before. I have mobile and web applications. Should I deploy each on a separate EKS cluster? Would it be a good approach? Now, I will assume that we are literally talking about 2 applications, not 3, not 4, not 5. And I would be questioning whether you should have a single EKS cluster. And especially not 2 clusters for that. It's expensive, right? You're paying for control planes double. It's maintenance nightmare for no good reason. I would never put 2 applications on 2 clusters. Unless there is a special requirement that is not mentioned. Sometimes people kind of come up with special requirement, isolation or whatever. But no.
Yeah, unless there's a necessity, I don't see the reason that it needs to be 2 different EKS clusters. It can be 1 cluster in most cases. It's best off to be in 1 cluster for 2 applications, right?
Yeah, we're talking about 2.
Depends. An application, how many microservices is that application, right? It obviously comes down to scale and all of that. I also don't think, I know that every single cloud provider now is supporting thousands of worker nodes and all of this, and they're all pushing the limit. I also hate that. I hate Kubernetes clusters that reach enormous scales that, don't make any sense in my mind. But there's reasonable scale that you can reach. 100 nodes is a reasonable scale. I think once you start going over 100 nodes, it's when you start thinking of, should I really be breaking this up? Is there a logical way to break this into multiple clusters? But I don't see the logic in breaking up the 2 apps.
That's a huge difference, at least in my head, between what you said and the question kind of. My kind of comment on, hey, it's too expensive to run a separate control plane nodes if you're talking about 2 nodes clusters, right? If it's 100 nodes, then 3 small control plane nodes do not make a difference. Exactly. Neither in maintenance nor in the cost.
Exactly, right? Yeah.
Okay, Scott. Well, how do you see DevOps with AI?
I think
you can ask it question and get wrong answers. Apart from that,
that's the main one, right? I think that in the end, AI is making us much faster, mediocre engineers. Because people are just copy pasting from ChatGPT or whatever, and they are becoming, and the outputs that we're returning are more mediocre than ever before. Unfortunately, I think so. Right now, I think in the short term, it is hurting the DevOps world, actually. However, I believe that we are going to, I don't know if it'll be this year or next year, but in the near future, I think we are going to start getting more and more actual beneficial AI solutions in these areas, where with the different agentic models and different things that are actually going to make it really beneficial in the DevOps world. I think that it is going to help. I just think right now we're actually in the hype is when the quality is shooting down. I think it is going to benefit us in, hopefully at some point this year, we start reaching actual integrations of AI into DevOps tools that mean something. Most of them today are just gimmicks.
I would be slightly less harsh and say, yeah, future I cannot predict. It's close to impossible, right? Eventually, I would like, in ideal situation, AIs to actually do operations themselves instead of just telling me what I did wrong, right? But right now, I feel that AI is more helpful to experienced than non-experienced people, right? Because I often use GitHub Copilot. And I use it on things that most of the time, not on things, I don't use it with Rust, which I don't write code in. So I don't use it for that. I use it for things that I'm very familiar with. And it speeds me up. And I can probably detect it being wrong, partly wrong, or completely or wrong like this, right? So I personally don't use AI to help me do things I don't know how to do. I use it to speed up my process, just as I use Stack Overflow to kind of like, hey, this algorithm that does this, I don't want to write it from scratch. Let me search for it. And then discard it if it's wrong.
Which I think is true, right? And I think that's a much better model than the people that just use it for things that they don't know and then, whatever. But even in that case, like, this would be a question for you. If you know writing Go probably the most out of any language. That's the language that you like writing the most, right?
Yeah.
And you know that there are 10,000 different ways to write something in Go. There are more efficient ways, there are better ways, there are more advanced ways, and then there's the common way that everyone has written stuff. Copilot and all of these AI models have been built learning off of everything. And the more examples there are out there, the more the chances are that is what it's going to recommend to you. Now, when it recommends you a way of implementation in Go, is it actually the best way of implementing it? Probably not. You could probably come up in many cases with a better way yourself to implement it. But because it's good enough, you're going to accept it because you got it for free.
I see it differently, and this is my use case, not necessarily a recommendation to anybody. I don't use it that much for that. I use it for the mundane tasks, right? Kind of like, I need to write 100 lines of code, and there are 10 of lines of code that really matter, and 90 lines of code are, I don't know, let's say it's a CLI, kind of, hey, get all the arguments and translate them to struct, right, in Go. That's a waste of my time, right? I want to focus on things that matter. So kind of basically I do the opposite of what you said. If there is some algorithm that really matters, I want to get to it faster rather than to do it for me.
Which in those cases, that's where AI helps. I think unfortunately, many people are not using it that way. And they're using it because they don't want to think.
Now,
you
I
want
agree.
to think and not do the mundane. There are many people that use it because they don't want to think.
Yes, but let's face it. AI is not changing that at all. Person who is going to build, it's what?
It's exacerbating the issue.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's faster to get wrong information than before. But you were still. Before AI, you were getting it from Stack Overflow and copying and pasting from there. And you know where AI gets it? From Stack Overflow as well. Kind of like, so it's a question of whether you're using AI to do the work for you. Kind of, hey, it takes a minute to get it from Stack Overflow. You can get it in 5 seconds from AI that will go to Stack Overflow for you, in a way.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. One from before. Okay. How we feel about the most recent licensing rug pull, Fluent Assertions? What can companies do to shield themselves from such situations? Let's start with, do you know what is Fluent Assertions, Scott?
I have no clue.
Okay. But let's generalize it. Let's say it's a company, but yet another one that did something with licensing. Now, I have mixed feelings about this, right? Because companies are also at the same, not only companies that are licensing software, but companies that are using software are abusing it as well, just to make it clear. kind of you go and you use a bunch of open source projects for completely free, and you're not contributing back, you're not paying anybody, you're just earning money from it, and then something happens and your business is at risk. I'm now playing devil's advocate, right? What can you do? What can you do? Get familiar with the open source project that you're using. And then if somebody changes the license, you can fork it.
Yeah.
I'm doing extreme here. I'm not saying that it's okay to relicense projects, but what can you do? You can pay the maintainers so that they don't have to relicense.
Again, my general approach on this is when you are evaluating the tools you are going to use, always prefer open source that is part of a foundation and not under a company itself, where it makes sense. That does not mean do not use open source from other companies, but you need to do open source that is company driven and not foundation driven, with a very understanding knowledge that there is a very good chance that that license will change. So if you are going to build your company around that, either know that you don't have an issue with license changing, or be willing to pay if you need to down the road as well, or have an escape route, right? But you have to go into it with open eyes, right? I don't blame a company for doing what they need to do to make money. That is a business decision that every company has the right to make, and it is theirs. In the end, you also have the right to fork it. But in general, find what's in a foundation. It's usually a better option.
I feel that big part of the problem is that a number of people does not understand that the fact that something is open source does not mean that it's not owned by anybody, right? And I feel that that's where your conversation about foundation comes in, right? It's who do you want to own the project you rely on, right? It can be a person, which is the riskiest. That's even riskier than company pulling the rug, right? Because that person gets sick, and that's it.
Right. Yeah.
It can be owned by a company, or it can be owned by a foundation. Those are the three levels of risk, with foundation being the least risky.
Right. However, there are always the anomalies of this. What is the number one library for building CLIs in Go? It's Cobra. Cobra is under a private GitHub repo of SPF13, which is the guy that started Go at Google, or one of the guys that started Go at Google. It's a private thing and every single kubectl, all of the HashiCorp, all these things built around Cobra. Cobra is a private project. In the end, it's open source, right? Which is crazy.
You know, there are different effects projects can have on your company, your business, right? If somebody says you cannot use Cobra anymore unless you pay me $100 million, right? I can rewrite to something else. It will take me hours, maybe a day, maybe a week, let's say, because I went crazy with it. It's not. It's not a problem. Now, if somebody comes and says you cannot use Kubernetes anymore, that's a problem.
You can't use etcd.
etcd, for example. Yeah, exactly. That's even better example. So, you know, if it's not mission critical something, hey, you have a library, Node.js library that you're using, and that library disappears. Okay, so what happens? Nothing. First of all, you can still use it. You cannot just upgrade it, for example, right? So what? Okay. No, we already answered that one. Let's go for one of the live ones. Do we think remote development using tools like Tilt is the way to go when shifting left down? Do you see that methodology in the industry? My answer to the first question is definitely yes, 100%, without going whether it's Tilt or something else, just to be clear. Now, to my surprise, and I think that it's so highly beneficial, it can drastically change how a company operates for better. Because what we do is complex these days, and setting it, let's imagine that you have infinite memory and CPU on your laptop. Still, setting it up locally is complex, right? Now, the second question, do you see that methodology in the industry? Sadly, not enough. For reasons I cannot explain, I feel that it did not pick up sufficiently, and I cannot explain why.
Yeah, I think that in my mind, remote development, the answer is yes. 100% it's needed. I'm not sure that the tilt approach to it is the right approach. I'm actually more of a fan of the dev container style approach of code spaces, Gitpod, DevPod, which is a completely different way of looking at remote development, because tilt, I still need all the development tools locally, right? So I still need to deal with setting up my environment, and don't tell me to use DevBox because no. But like you still need to set up my local environment in order to develop locally. It's just running remotely. When it's things like that actually develop remotely, I think that's the huge value. We're starting to see, I think, a bit of a change in that area, that it's gaining more traction. I think the reason we are is AI. So not everyone has GPUs locally to run things. So I think that kind of exacerbates the need for these things. And I think the only other reason is like we're starting to see, the reason I say that it's starting to gain more traction is when you look like JetBrains IDEs just added support for dev containers, right? We're starting to see more and more IDEs adding the support. We're seeing that Gitpod moved from their Gitpod YAML to dev container, right? Like, so we're starting to see a standardization happen around the dev container spec, both from the IDE side and the tooling side, which I think is the opener for this. I think it's proving that the industry is moving there, just way too slowly. Everyone should be there, and not enough are there. But I think we are seeing traction grow.
That's the part I don't agree. I mean, some, yes. If you ask me 5 years ago, when those tools started exploding, I would give you a prediction that it would be used much more today than it is.
Oh, and I think it's like we said last week, chaos engineering, we both thought would be much more out there than it is already, right?
Yeah. I think that the easiest explanation of those things, in retrospective, it always turns out that simply, okay, some things are bad, some ideas are bad and never lift off, like, I don't know, blockchain, maybe. But some are simply too early because companies have agenda. There is a natural progression towards things, right? And maybe simply majority of companies are not there yet.
Yeah.
Just about
We talked, if you remember when you were out here and we sat at the conference outside hanging out and not going into sessions, one of the conferences when you were here, we talked about that with microkernels. It was the same thing. It just came way too early.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Or in case of microkernels, maybe also too late.
Either too late or too early, but it didn't come on the right time. Let's put it
exactly.
Exactly.
Oh man, I remember when I think I was introduced in one of the early DockerCons to microkernels. If I had money, I would invest in those companies back then. And now I would be a poor person. You're 100%.
Exactly.
Okay, would you use Cilium as a gateway API provider in Talos Linux? I like the idea of Cilium extended way over being a CNI. I like the idea as well. I haven't used Cilium's gateway API, so I use Cilium, not gateway API, so I don't have the answer to that one.
And my personal approach is I'm actually not a fan of the fact that Cilium is going so far out to all these other areas. I think that in the end, it's similar to the question on like Knative versus like going with Keda and 10 other tools that do the same thing, but that are best of breed. I think that, when we try and come up with one solution that, does everything, you end up with not the best implementation of anything. And I think that they are an amazing CNI. And therefore, I think that is the area that makes sense for them. I don't like that CNIs are trying to start and becoming ingress controllers and load balancer providers, and they're trying to become service meshes, and they're trying to do 20 million things. It's like, you're a CNI. There's another project. It could be built by the same company. I don't care, but it needs to be a separate project with no dependency. Because they're dependent now. If I want to use Gateway API of Cilium, I have to use Cilium as my CNI. If I want to use their service mesh, I have to use Cilium as my CNI.
Yes, and I kind of partly agree. I mean, on kind of pick the right tools, I agree. But that does not exclude, and I haven't used its Gateway API, but that does not exclude that Cilium's Gateway API is just as good as any other or better. The great thing about Gateway API is that it's a sort of standardization. It's a spec rather than anything else. So I could, unlike some other solutions, I could be using Cilium's Gateway API and Cilium CNI. I don't know how much they're related or not. But rug pull that you mentioned, hey, I could replace it with some other implementation in no time, right? Precisely because it's a standardized API. So I'm not that worried about, hey, will I be tied to Cilium?
Right. No,
I would be much more worried with Ingress, for example, when people, you remember when everybody was coming up with alternatives like HTTP route. It's not Ingress, it's HTTP route. That's a rug pull.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about certifications? Do you know which one is the most useful, Scott? Because I know nothing.
So certifications, in my mind, from, let's say, beyond any, elements that partners or things like that may matter of, certifications to reach certain, things within vendors. I think that in the end, when it comes to certifications, there's two types of certifications. There are the ones that mean absolutely nothing, and there are the ones that get you in the door but will not get you a job. I don't believe that certifications will ever get you a job. There are certifications that are harder to get that will get you in the door, though. I think I do not personally, and I am proud to say that I hold 0 certifications today that are active. And I am proud to say that because I learn on my own and I don't learn for a test or I don't, whatever. That's just not my style. There are, I think that certifications like CKA, I actually think is one of the better certifications that exists out there because it's not a multiple choice question. It is an actual lab where you're doing something. Those you actually have to know something in order to do. So those are better. Usually associate level stuff, the professionals mean something.
One thing where I might disagree with you is when you said certification will not get you a job. I think it will if you're applying for a no experience job, kind of, I just finished university, and there are 2 of you, both with the same grades and everything. One has a certificate. Nobody has experience, right? No candidate has experience, but you have a certification. That will increase your likelihood to get a job.
Yes, I think that still it gets you in the door, right? Which is, by the way, one of the hardest things in many cases. I'm not belittling that at all, right? Sometimes when there are 50 people, if you think about it, if there's a company right now and there's 50 people putting in their, CVs to get a job, anything that you get that gets you in the door quicker is a good thing. You still need to prove yourself in the interview, but the people with the worst certifications are going to get in first, probably. They're going to answer more of the criteria.
Here's the thing. Let me hear what you think. Let's say 2 scenarios. One, in both scenarios, people are students, kind of like I'm studying, right? I'm not employed anywhere. I don't have a working experience. One, apart from studying, gets certifications. Another one uses that same time to contribute to open source projects.
So which one would I prefer to hire? The answer is the one that contributes to the open source projects most likely. However, the one that will make it past HR to the actual interview will most likely be the person that did the certifications, because when you're filtering down the CVs, the number one thing that you're going to be looking at is either experience, which neither of them have job experience, right? So that goes down because they're students right now. So the only thing that is actually left is the certifications, and the other thing is a side note, right? Unfortunately, I just don't think that the process that most HR departments have of trying to find them is good enough.
You're probably right. That just proves how out of the trends I am. I would hire somebody who modified the documentation on open source rather than certification, but that's
so would I, right? It's just a question of how do they get to you, or how do they get to the technical person for the interview? They have to go through HR.
Okay, promote CFG between environments and stage Kubernetes version updates across multiple environments. Do you, Scott, know what is CFG?
No.
Okay, if you can put in a comments, we can give it another shot. I'm pretty sure Scott is Googling it right now.
And I can't find it. I typed CFG and I can't figure out what that is. So context-free grammars, I don't know. So, yeah.
Okay, next one. There is a previous comment that says we use this deploy model to accomplish this. And this explanation, application CI builds image and writes image update to manifest templates repo, some Helm, some customers, some queue, some YTT. And there's more. Templates repo renders templates and then writes the diff to the GitOps repo in the directory corresponding to the environment. This lets us use application CI to promote application-only changes by triggering the promotions from the application CI. Without going into details, the nuances, that's a thing. To me, that feels pretty reasonable without going into nitpicking, right?
Yep. Yeah, without going into, why use 20,000 different tools, I think great. If there's use cases for them, that's awesome. I think in the end, the fact that you're pushing raw YAML to a manifest repo in the end, and that gives me the ability to diff them and all of that, and that's what gets pulled down. Awesome. Perfect. You're doing it the right way.
Okay, from Victor Biga, let's use cargo out all the way to prod. I'm assuming that this is cargo from Acuity. And I don't believe that cargo alone has the capability to execute the processes in between, right? So I wouldn't rely on cargo. So I could only assume that you're promoting all the way to production without running exhaustive tests and doing whatever else you might want to be doing in between. And in that case, I would say, why are you doing all the way to prod? Why not directly to prod? Just directly to prod. Save yourself some time. I might be wrong.
While you're at it, While you're at it, just do extreme programming also, and just always push directly to main, and never roll back. And exactly.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, there's more from Naifan. We'll skip that. I think we answered. Okay. Hi, I want to scale pods in deployments based on messages on queue, AWS SQS. For example, 10 messages, 1 pod, 20 messages, 2 pods, 30 messages, 3 pods. And then it says, how to do this?
3, 2, 1.
Keda. There we go. What I like about the current situation, not with all the areas, but unlike situation, let's say 5 years ago, there is a significant number of areas that it's pretty clear now who's the winner.
Yeah.
Kind of. And KEDA is one of those. It might be, we might have something better in the future, but there are no 57 tools. There are no infinite number of choices. It's KEDA.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah. Which is awesome, right? It makes it so much easier.
And we have a comment from Jonathan, KEDA to the rescue. Exactly. Let's see. Probably been asking this before, but can you suggest a good project or book to develop and learn an end-to-end project as a beginner? It's been a long time since I read such books, so I don't have a recommendation. I'm not sure about Scott.
Yeah, I haven't either. I've never really been a book reader myself that much. I'm more of a, read some blog post and then go and work on the keyboard for a few hours.
I was reading books a lot in the past when I was writing C code, kind of like they're forever. Like, they're equally valid today as they were 50 years ago, right? But no, definitely not.
No, I think there's also a challenge with books today that unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, the speed that technology is moving at these days, by the time that a book is written, it's edited, it's published, it gets into people's hands, it's already 4 versions old of that technology and is most likely outdated. Like in many cases, not in all areas. I think we're starting to see a slowing down in Kubernetes core, let's say. So maybe you could write a book already on Kubernetes. It was moving so quickly. Like, but with the overall DevOps, platform engineering, all these spaces where I'm really, let's say, living my life in the platform engineering space mostly, it moves so quickly that any book you would write today or read today, tomorrow is irrelevant almost. So it's, it's a challenge, specifically books. I think that's why blogs and things like that are a better resource.
But unless it's something, and you said it as well, unless it's something that is already kind of in a stable phase. Okay, I would, if I would know a good one, I would have no problem recommending a book about Kubernetes that does not touch any projects that you might want to run on top, but kind of just pure Kubernetes. Oh yeah, we're gonna get, does not include debug containers, but whoopity, who cares, right?
Exactly. Right. And okay, maybe it still has, depending on when it was released, maybe it's still V1 beta 1 ingress. But like, okay, so tiny little changes, nothing that really matters.
Yeah. Okay. What would you use to verify the signature of an image and ensure that the image does not contain vulnerabilities before deploying it to production? That's complicated. In terms like, what is your goal, right? Without answering the direct question. Because you might say, there are no vulnerabilities at the time I scanned it, which is actually always valid, right? So, and if you don't care about that, coming back to that subject later, if at one moment it did not have any vulnerabilities, then you don't need to. Then you verify the signature of. Then you sign the image after you verify that it has no vulnerabilities, right? So signatures. I feel that many people don't know, but actually you can have multiple signatures. You can say, hey, I signed to confirm that this is the image of this specific release or this specific commit. And I will sign this image to validate that it's been tested. And I will sign this image to validate that it has no high vulnerabilities, right?
Exactly.
Now, the fact that something does not have vulnerabilities when you checked it does not mean that it doesn't have it a minute later.
Right.
Just to be clear. So you might want to run it, have some process that does it at runtime.
Right. So scanning an image at runtime would be, or scanning an image at deployment time would be nearly impossible because just the amount of time it takes to scan, right? You can't scan in the inline there. I think that the way of doing this is, in my mind, there is one container registry to rule them all, which is Harbor. I think it's by far the best image registry that exists on planet Earth. If you are only in a single cloud and you are only using that cloud and everything, then maybe you use that cloud's one, whatever. But I think in general, if you're multi-cloud, all that, just use Harbor. It is much better. It's easy to self-host or use a hosted Harbor. Harbor has scheduled scanning that you can run on whatever interval, and you can have it block pulling images that have vulnerabilities over a certain criticality at the project level. So that's, I think, the way that you deal with vulnerabilities is by using an image registry that has that capability of both scanning and then also, seeing what exists and then blocking pulling off of that. That's for that level. When it comes to the verifying signatures, this is where I split it. If you have the need for advanced policy management in Kubernetes, meaning you are using Kyverno because
Yes.
you are not going to write Rego. In those cases, you use Kyverno to validate the cosign signature. If, on the other hand, you do not need policy management, then install the cosign, their own simple authorization validator. It's a single pod instead of Kyverno, which is a much larger system, has more whatever. Go with the simple cosign verification tool. Very easy. So that is only if you don't need Kyverno. If you have Kyverno, why install another tool? Just use Kyverno. It's great for that as well.
Best tool for chaos engineering. And yet another one I have no answer. I haven't been practicing chaos engineering for a while now, so I'm not up to date.
Yeah, I've always liked Chaos Monkey. I like Chaos Mesh. There was another one that I liked back in the day that came from VMware, but they got rid of it. Mangle, I think they called it. That was actually one of my favorites, but they killed that open source project. So, Chaos Mesh, Chaos Monkey.
Another one, I don't know. Have you heard about Ingate, Scott?
I have not.
Okay, we don't know. But what I will say is that if this is a replacement for Ingress spec, I'm out of it. I'm not doing that.
Well, no, it says the future replacement of Ingress Engine X.
Ingress Engine X.
Yeah. Now, my question is, which Ingress Engine X? Ingress Engine X or Engine X Ingress? Because there's two different projects that do the exact same thing. But yeah. Anything that replaces the tool that has more annotations than there are human beings on planet Earth, I think is a good thing.
So that's where I was going. Before you start thinking about which implementation of Ingress to replace with which other implementation of Ingress, jump to Gateway API. And then you can replace them every week if you want. Scott is Googling Ingate. I know him. I'm sure
is
of
under
that.
Kubernetes now. It's under Kubernetes. It's an Ingress and Gateway API controller for Kubernetes.
Okay, cool.
So it's also Gateway API. So it's going to be one implementation that does both Ingress and Gateway API, like many others do. In that case, great. I always love having an official one under the Kubernetes SIGs that does something. It doesn't mean it's necessarily the best or that I would use it, but I'm always happy to have another tool under the Kubernetes umbrella. I think it gives an easy way for people to get started. So that's awesome.
Very cool. I learned something. No, this is a comment only. Config the answer to different tools. Different teams manage different services and are each more comfortable with different things. That seems like a statement rather than a question.
Yeah, that was back to what I was saying of like why you have 20,000 tools of the Helm and then YTT and Q and all of that in the generation pipeline. And he's saying like it's because different teams prefer different tools. Awesome. That's the way it should be, because in the end they all generate YAML and that's what's in your GitOps repo. So good job. That's awesome. I love that approach.
Yeah. And here is a question or comment. Aren't annotations really a reflection of the Kubernetes API expressiveness? I don't think so. I think that annotations as used in, let's say, Ingress are proof that something is missing from the spec. Annotations are supposed to do that, but that's a temporary workaround rather than the solution. We are not supposed to. So in Kubernetes, ignoring now when situation where something is missing, everything related to spec is supposed to be in the spec. That's it. That's it. Kind of like it's not supposed to be outside spec. If it's outside spec, that's because something is missing, not because that's how it should be.
Exactly. It's 100%. And annotations are a last resort. They should always be temporary as much as possible. There are things that will never be temporary. Things like cert manager annotation, right? That's not part of core Kubernetes. Core Kubernetes is not going to put in a spec field on Ingress saying cert manager cluster issuer, right? So, okay, an annotation makes sense for that when you're integrating between different tools. But for one tool that's not integrating with other tools, just one tool's additional things, they need to be very short-lived.
When I see kind of, usually I don't even pay attention when I see an annotation or two, like you said for Cert Manager. But when I see those like kind of 5 or more, some alarm bells start ringing in my head, kind of like there's something wrong with you, boy. Okay, we are at the top of the hour, and this is the first time we went through all the questions. This is brilliant. Thank you all for coming. See you next one. See you in the next one. Cheers.
Cheers, everyone.